Good day, everybody. So today we're going to continue with our series of busting the perk. Actually, this kind of feels personal because I do feel attached to the perk. I do play this defense all the time, and I played against it all the time. So there's a lot going on in the perk. Very challenging opening to play, but very versatile. Lots of possibilities. Fianchettos, double fianchettos, the flexible pawn structures, attacks, counterattacks. White definitely has some challenges. They need to know what they're doing, but they do have a few cookie cutter systems that work really well. And among them is the system where they actually set up what I call a Yugoslav attack setup. It is actually a position where you set up D and E and F pawns.
And
So
and if
when
and
you
if we could
start moving the
if
H,
we could back up a step too. So what if I've never heard of the perk before? So could you explain the perk to me like as if I'm five?
well, actually, it's a Pierce defense, like we discussed
Perks,
in the
right?
last
Okay.
series. This is the idea, generally speaking, of this opening. Now here, G6 is the actual Pierce defense. Now C6, some people call it check, some people call it offensive defense, some people call it something else. So I don't want to go into a Pribble defense. I don't want to go into details and dispute the names. I
Sure.
just want to focus on the Pierce defense here.
So if I'm just
They,
starting out at chess though, and like people are playing e4, I'm thinking that you're supposed to always go e5, and so this looks kind of like chess on Mars. What is all this stuff with d6 and knight f6? Are we still following the same principles? Are we throwing e5 out the window? What's up with all this Pertz or Pirtz or whatever it's called?
Well, the idea is not to set up the position on the king side that can be easily attacked with bishop and knight. Like majority of the players have a difficult time with all this business with attack against f7. So there's nothing wrong with e5. It's a wonderful move, but you have to be prepared with all kinds of onslaught once the bishop gets to c4. And then there's variety of g4 pushes, c3, d4, d4, b4, knight getting to g5. So you have to kind of have a really close eye on f7 square. And God forbid you just overlooked it and boom, something gets to f7, the game is over. So d6 and knight f6 allows you to set up sort of like a defensive positioning here. No queen arrival anytime soon to the area of h5 and then to f7.
Mm-hmm.
And that is in itself already a fairly protective measure. And
One
the second thing
what
is
yeah. Well, one more,
fianchetto.
yeah, one more question I have about this though. So if I'm playing e4 and I'm not quite at like intermediate level or anything, I've probably never seen this before. So can I be sure that this video is going to be relevant to me? I mean, I've never if I'm playing e4 and I'm like 1100, no one's playing this yet. Are you sure that I'm still going to be learning some things out of this?
Of course, you need to basically learn how to build good, safe castling positions, and you also need to learn how to attack good, safe castling positions. Of course, everybody starts e4, e5, queen h5, and takes a pawn on e5, wins the rook on h8. All of that business is very exciting, but usually it ends in about a couple of games you win. Not everybody knows what you're doing, and you can't really exist in chess based on some chip tricks that you learn
Yeah.
when you 5 game moves, 5 move games. So the fianchetto is a very sturdy setup. What it allows you to build is a safe position of the king. Nothing is safe permanently, but at least you survive the first 10 moves, you complete your castling, you get your pieces out, and you actually what they call learn to stay in the game. Now, majority of players get very frustrated by playing openings where there's a very quick combat in the center taking place. They just simply have a hard time keeping track of various things defended and undefended. So for people that want to play a little bit slower in the beginning, just make sure they don't get checkmated. This is a great effort. This is a great position to build. The king is safe. And at least for the first 10 moves, you can focus on getting your pieces out as opposed to focus on not getting checkmated. So it's a little bit different. It's a little bit slower from the black side, but it's very sturdy. When it becomes really popular is when people crossed about 1400 level.
Right.
It's certainly not a popular setup for people 800, 900, or even 1100. But once you cross 14, 15, 1600, a lot of people begin to play the fianchetto lines,
Right.
whether
Right.
this is Sicilian Dragon or the Pierce defense or what they call rat, G6, bishop G7,
Yeah.
C5. So these things become a lot more popular once players acquire a little bit of skill.
So you hear that, guys? So if your concern right now is, well, I've never seen this opening, I don't think it's going to come up. Two different things. For one, eventually this will come up, and so it's good to be ready for it in advance. Second thing is the things that you're learning and the concepts we're going to be talking about in an abstract way are certainly going to be relatable and useful for your chess development. So thank you.
Yep. Absolutely, and specifically the fianchetto positions allow for very safe castling, and you need to learn how to attack the safe castling position. Obviously, it's a lot easier to set up bishop c4, knight f3, knight g5 attack when the black pawn is on e5 and diagonal a2, f7 is not super well protected. It's a lot more difficult to make any kind of kingside attack when there is a rook on f8 guarding the square f7, and the pawn on g6 is protected by the other two pawns, and the pawn on h7 is protected by the knight and the presence of the pawn on g6. So if you're not aware how to storm positions like this, you just basically end up shuffling your pieces on the back without really making any progress. So it's a really important part of the chess skill. Learn to play the positions with fianchetto and play against them.
Cool, let's get into it.
So Pirc's defense, we've had in the first video, we reviewed the Austrian attack with f4. We also reviewed Larry Christian's game against Jan Elvest, where he played this variation here, kind of like a niche line, a bit of a mix between the classical knight f3, bishop e2, and the line that we're going to look at here. Today we're going to look at a straightforward play with bishop e3 and f3. Now, for people who play King's Indian with black, they probably have seen this. Like in the King's Indian, this position looks with the pawn on c4. So that would be the Samish variation against the King's Indian. So the ideas are very similar. What is the plan? The plan is to play queen d2, castle queenside, and launch the pawn storm. The pawn storms are fun. They're very quick. The pawns advance. You open up the h file and you checkmate the king.
Make sure you use lots of circles and arrows and stuff. People love arrows and stuff.
That's right. So here, let's say, what should white do in this position? After f3 for black, if you're a black player, you need to establish some sort of presence on the queen side. If you just focus on your side of the board, you're not counterplaying. Remember, one of the key features of Pirc is active counterplay. If you passively playing, not creating any counterattacks, usually you're just going to get railroaded because your opponent controls the center. Don't forget, they control the center, they control the space, they can advance faster than you are. So here is a very important move, c6. Now, what does that do?
Contest the center.
Protects the squares b5 and d5, but also prepares the queen jump to a5 or b6, or for that matter, the advance of the b pawn forward. So after c6, we usually play something like queen d2, b5, and Garry Kasparov actually played knight e2 in this position in his famous game against Topalov, but we're going to look at the straight play today, queenside castle. So that's what white is all about. Castling queenside and all set to go for the kingside storm with g and h pawn marching up. Now, why G and H pawns? Why not D and E? Well, if you want to castle there, if you're black, if you want to castle to the king side, now white needs to open this position up somehow to checkmate. So what's the easiest way to do so? Probably at some point going to h6 with the bishop, trading the bishops, and then opening up the h file. Once the h file is open, the queen can get to h6 once the bishops are off the board, and that's how you get to the king. So in this game, black immediately kind of takes charge and plays queen a5. What do you think the idea of that move is, Ryan?
Counterattack, just like you said. I mean, whenever you have opposite side castling positions, it's kind of all about just going right for each other's jugulars. And so with this move right here, you're trying to go b4, kick away the knight. When the knight moves, you can take on a2. Absolutely,
that's 100% correct. And now, very important move here, super important move, king b1. Now that simply covers a2 pawn. And there are some positions, and again, not necessarily this one, but there are some positions where you can do something like this. a cool little discovery.
But
And if
that
they
hangs
take
my
your
knight.
queen, you actually have a check here. And there you are. You get yourself a little bit of a gain there. Now, not a very simple position here because your knight is a little bit restrained, but you have move d5 coming up. So let's say the bishop goes somewhere.
I mean, you want a pawn, yeah.
And you want a pawn. Let's say you can play probably e5 or d5. I would guess one of those moves will get your knight out of the way. And if the pawn goes to c5, you hit him with e5. You take the pawn, you win back c5. Knight is protected. You threaten knight g6 check at some point. You can push the d pawn up, defending the knight, so he's no longer in danger. So that's another idea behind king b1. So if you're black, you have to be mindful of the possibility of a knight jump. And you exclaim that you're hanging the knight. Well, that's true, but you're actually about to win the queen on a5. So there's definitely some compensation there. Instead of castling, I think first knight bd7 was played. Therefore, this knight d5 is a little bit less relevant here. Pawn on b5 is not going up yet, so therefore we go bishop h6. Now, this move is very direct. What is white trying to do? Is taking out a major defender of the king and getting right near the king. Now, the downside, it does take a fair amount of time, and black is obviously beginning their own storm. Now, if you actually look at white pieces, you kind of see, well, shoot, we've got all the pieces in the back. We only have the queen out, and black has two knights in the middle, so what's up? What are we doing here? Well, actually, it doesn't really take that much effort for white pieces to join the game. And the queen is there on its own. And you have to remember, if you want to be a successful attacking player, the strategy means that you have to find the ways for your pieces to work together. It's not about single piece completing all the work for everybody else. It's about the team effort. And right now, your biggest teammate, the queen on h6, is ready to go, but by itself, it's not really going to make much headway. For instance, you can go queen g7, attack the rook. Well, you attack the rook, congratulations. After rook g8, what do? Well, you probably have to go back. So you spend two moves. Yes, they lost their castling rights, but in the big scheme of things, they frequently play without castling in this system.
So you got to bring in your pieces. Okay, we're looking at knight h3. Maybe the other knight goes to like f4. Where do you start?
You start with knight h3 for a couple of reasons. Once you get to g7, it would be nice to have the knight on g5, right? So if the queen gets to g7 and you got a knight on g5, you actually suddenly attack h8 and f7. So the queen is going to get helped by the knight right away. So black plays c4. And what's the idea behind that move? Well, he's trying to actually get to c3 with the pawn. If he gets to c3 with the pawn and you play b3, then after queen a3, your king is going to be immediately threatened with checkmate. So looks very intimidating, but white is well prepared. And again, do not forget to provide your king with support. That's a key thing a lot of people forget about. They get involved in their own plans and their own attack ideas, but just don't pay attention to any defense. And now, look at this. You've got A, B, and C pawns there in the king. That's not a really powerful crew. You need to kind of beef it up. So knight C1, very standard, solid move, defends A2, protects B3 square. One more time. And if the pawn goes to C3, you can actually kind of pinch it back, bring the knight a little bit closer to the center. And after queen C7, you can actually start the attack. A5 and bishop b5. And now we sacrifice the pawn, we open the position up, and look at how many pieces immediately join the attack. And just in a couple of moves, we've got lots of pieces in. So can black take on d4 safely? Would that be a good idea? I suspect the answer is probably more no than yes. And I think a couple of different ways. I actually personally like this move quite a bit. Just kind of increase the pressure, bring more pieces in. And next move, I take on d4 with a rook or knight. I'm not yet sure, whichever, but
Just in case you
Here
guys
can,
weren't aware, in opposite side castling positions, the importance of material goes way down and activity goes way up. So that's kind of what would cue us, to think about rook here instead of taking right here. This little pawn right here, really not nearly as important as just going for the king in opposite side castling positions. Hey, this is interesting, though, that you went like that. I thought you were going to go to some different with the knight. I thought after here you're going to go like this and then here and then here. But, then you have like the bishop coming in. So that's interesting that you kind of put the knight right here before any of that happens. And you don't mind the possibility of the pawn shield being shattered. That was kind of a neat way to do that caught my eye. Oops.
yes, actually, it's a very common technique because, playing b3 leaves you with somewhat of a permanent hole on the square b2. And, queen a3 mates begin to pop up. So what you want to do instead, you want to push the queen out of the way. And if he takes on b2, what's the big deal? Sometimes the opponent's pawn is your best defender. Remember that technique. The pawn on b2 cannot be captured by black pieces. That's actually a big deal. So,
yeah.
Whereas you got your king on b2, there's queen c3 check, queen a3 check, knight a4 check, all kinds of checks.
Right, interesting.
So this pawn can be kind of like at least temporary protector for your own good. So if you actually look at it further here, let's say bishop b5.
Oh, sorry, you were in this position before I catch off, yeah.
c3, knight b3, queen c7, e5. So we basically have to strike the king before they finish building up the development. And now we're trying to catch it before it escapes. e4, try to keep things locked up. Just take on e4 and play rook e1. And you see in this position, white is fully mobilized and black still has a lot to do. I feel like this position is definitely going to be in white's favor. Whether he's going to win or not is another matter, but it does look really good. I can look at a couple of more moves. Let's say there. So finally they got to c2, and after rook e2, the attack is over. Now the b4 is hanging. There is bishop a6 check coming up. Queen takes b4 coming up. So lots of interesting tactics here, and they seem to be kind of mutual. It's not that white is the only one that has tactics, but black also does. So I like this position for white because I feel like black's king is a little bit more open. That did not materialize. This what black, I think, should have played. What did black do? Black actually played bishop a6 instead. Defended the pawn, brought another piece in. Knight g5. So each side is positioning for the attack. And again, this was one of those cases where black should have proceeded a little bit more aggressively. What he should have done is rook c8 with the idea of c3 and c takes b2. That way the rook would be attacking the pawn on c2 after c3. Let's say you go g3, c3, knight b3, queen back to a4, queen g7. So you're starting your own attack, but at the same time you could see the black pieces are gathering near white's king, also very, very fast. And now knight c3 check is coming up, and all kinds of dangerous things begin to happen. You can see that each side has some really good stuff going on. Knight c3 check still looks really unpleasant. If I was white, I would be very nervous here.
Right.
So rook c8 definitely would have been a better move. Now, I'm not sure if white's play here was exemplary. Perhaps he should have done something else. Perhaps he should have played, instead of knight g5, possibly some developing move on the other side, maybe knight f4. But he did have a very specific idea in mind when he played knight g5. So black played knight to b6. It seems like a good move, and it seems like everything is going well. But right here, white missed a very simple win, in my opinion. Now, a lot of times, attack is a matter of one move, really. Like, for instance, what's the difference between the rook on c8 and the knight on b6? They both protect c4, right? But c4 is guarded. Nobody was really threatening it anyway. But what was the knight doing on d7 that it's not doing on b6? The answer is covering e5 square.
Yeah, well, I mean,
And white,
hindsight's always 2020, but I mean, you know, the rook is at 0% capacity right here. The knight was already at like 60, and so it goes from 60 to 90%. Whereas this rook could have gone from 0 to like 70%. So, you know, hindsight's 2020, but that looks like sort of an obvious judgment call there.
well, actually, the truth of the matter is this was actually a critical move that allows white to really win. The
Mm-hmm.
reason knight was really necessary in d7 is to protect d5, because here white has a very sudden strike, e5, which he actually did not play in the game. He should have. How so? Well, let's say you take on e5, pawn takes on e5. Now, does the knight move to d5 here? Is that a good idea? Probably super risky here. And now you can see the rook is in danger. If you play castling here, the knight might actually capture on f7. Not immediately because knight c3 is threatened, but after something like bishop e2, for instance.
Yeah. And for those of you
You
listening,
have some threats against
it's kind of
yourself.
interesting if you think about it, because my observation was just about the piece optimization in general between those two pieces, whereas you know, his thinking went to, well, what is the specific difference, you know, just instead of just general percentages, you know, what square has been softened, and what move are we going to make, you know. So different ways of thinking about it, you know. Ideally, you have a more concrete rationale for your moves and everything.
Well, that's correct. You have to be very concrete. And actually, come to think of it, I don't think I've actually even played the better move when I played queen g7. There's ought to be a better way than this. Let's say right here, after knight d5, queen e5 actually loses faster. Why is that? Because you've got queen g7 move here. And why is that bad? Well,
Setting
you
up the
kind of have
pin.
to go to f8, and now you have knight h7. You see that? The rook on f8 attacked. And can the knight take on h7? No. How come? Queen takes c5. The sudden loss of the game.
Right.
So what do? You have to go to d7, lose the exchange, and after bishop e2, you still can't castle, and you have pretty much a lost position. Next move is rook h to e1, and with a stuck king in the middle, your prospects of survival are very, very minuscule. Now, what about knight d5 instead of opening the position now? Would that be a better move? Yes, probably so, but I'm thinking that after e6, this would still be extremely difficult position. How so? Well, you have to play f6, right? And
I'm not convinced. Why do you have to play f6?
Well, f7 is hanging. What do? You want to let it go?
Is there anything else? Or maybe even f5 after you go e6?
Oh, the computer actually likes g3 better. Look at that. I actually thought that e6 is a better move. Actually, e6 can be met by castling. Look at that. Knight c3 check. Yeah. Wow.
Yes, I knew f6 wasn't necessary.
Very tricky. So g3 appears to be a better move. g3, queenside castle, and then knight f7. So
interesting stuff.
Here?
Yeah.
No. Well, maybe this guy actually played a better move. I thought that e5 was a winning move, but he doesn't have to take.
Interesting.
Wow. So queen g7, that's what he played. Attack the rook. Rook went to f8, and here he went e5. The big difference is here you kind of gain a move here, and after take, knight went to d5. Now here, castling has not yet been played, and that's actually the critical difference. Now, when you played e6, again, probably knight c3 was necessary. So what are we trying to do here? We're trying to catch the king before the king escapes with castling. That's always easier to get done when the king, checkmating is always easier to get done when the king is in the center. When the king is not in the center, it always takes longer. Now, black is actually putting up together a very dangerous counterattack as well. He's threatening knight c3 check. So the computer actually says queenside castle is bad, but knight c3 is good. Imagine that. Knight c3 check, pawn takes, now queen takes g5.
Whoa.
Very tricky. And now he takes f7 check, means rook f7. And what do you do? If you go queen h8, he goes rook f8. And in the meantime, In the meantime, you've got b takes c3 coming up, and suddenly your attack pretty much disappeared. And again, why? You got no pieces to support it with. Your
Right.
bishop is stuck at the bottom. Your rook and queen are the only two pieces fighting, while on a black side, you actually have lots of pieces helping out. So somewhere here, I guess when I analyzed this, I mostly looked at queen takes e5, and that was definitely a bad move. But knight d5 would make a big difference.
Mm.
So maybe black's play here wasn't really that bad.
Quite a bit going on, that's for sure.
Quite a bit going on. It looks like he actually made a mistake a little bit later. So what happened in the game was queen g7, rook f8, e5, takes, knight d5, and here e6 was played. Apparently, that move was a mistake, and a better play would have been g3. And here, black must play knight c3. Instead, he actually castled. And that was, to me, that was a weird move, because after he takes f7, he actually now facing lots of problems. Why? Because one of the mechanics of this check is that you actually have capture on d1. Well, you now don't. How come? Well, your rook is attacked with check, and what do?
Resign.
You can't play rook d8 because queen takes d8 and then promotion anyway. If you go to the 7th rank, queen e7 check, then you clearly are facing very diminishing odds here. The king is right in the middle of the attack, and you have no play.
Right.
The computer says 17 points up. So one move really took the game from a good game into a bad game. So
Castling queenside was a losing
takes
move.
f7, he's suddenly lost.
Yeah, wild.
And even though this actually looks like a smart idea, connecting the rook to the attack, putting the king into a safe zone, but in a position like this, remember that there are in chess two kinds of thinking: general principles and tactics. The best players are able to combine general principles with tactics and determine which way is the best for a particular situation.
Exactly.
Good players sometimes are able to play on a positional level so well that tactics actually work in their favor. There were several chess players like that. One of them was Smyslov. He was really good, world chess champion only for 1 year, but he was really good at intuitively spotting trends in the position. He was really good at spotting small differences between different things that would make one position from good to bad. Now, most players can't really play like this. I always say that in a position where there are multiple blows from one side to the other, you always have to look at the concrete situation and look at the concrete move. Look at captures and checks all the time in every situation. Otherwise, if you just look in general principles, queenside castling looks like a perfect move. Rook enters the attack. Now there is a discovery with knight c3 check, but it turns out to be that you really can't use the discovery, because once your rook goes to d1, your f8 rook is undefended, so you lose.
And that's one thing you said that really stuck with me too, is just when there's a lot of peace conflict, not even necessarily the word tactical, but rather just looking for a lot of peace conflict specifically. That's when general principles are less reliable. And of course, the general principle we're referring to here is just castle your king. Everyone knows to do that, but there is so much going on the board that you want to look at it more concretely for sure. And that principle is not going to be as reliable.
Absolutely, 100% agree. Here, I actually, to be honest, I didn't even look at that move initially, because I was mostly focusing on this. And that is, again, when you're focusing on one specific play, you sometimes miss things that are super important. Obviously, b takes c3 is a horrible move. You just get checkmate.
Yeah.
Why was I focusing on this? Because I was thinking, how do I utilize my queen for a checkmate on b2? Well, bummer, you actually don't need to think about that right now. You can just simply take the knight on g5, eliminating a super important supporter of the queen, and now the queen is basically helpless. It can make a couple of checks here, but if you actually look at this position, boy, this actually looks like a disaster. We lost all of our attacking players except for queen and rook. Knight is no longer there. The bishop is stuck on f1. The rook on h1 is not even in the game. And black can just play queen b5 check on the next move.
Yeah, black's dominating now, yeah.
Dominating, right. Rook b8. Now, can we play another check? Sure, we can play another check. the king on f7 even safer than it was. If you look at this situation, we cannot attack a single thing in this position. So really bad. Now my screen went bad. What's going on, Coach Ryan?
Oh no. Well, it's working on my end here.
Do you see my board? Somehow my screen went dark.
Oh no. Well, I still see everything on my end.
So wait a minute.
Well, you get coordinated for that. It'll kind of repivot us back. So once he gets that working,
all right, I'm back.
Cool. So Black had just castled. We were trying to, philosophize and everything about kind of the difference between general principles and then, concrete tactics. And so the fact of the matter is, though, Black has just blundered, and so now White is going to be able to capitalize on that and win this game in style. Let's see how White does that.
Yes, he simply takes on f7, and suddenly the position has become completely lost. It's just one turn, and that pawn on f7 makes a huge difference.
Also, if you wouldn't mind, could you turn your webcam forward a little bit so we can see you? There we go.
Sure. Now, can we now do the same exercise with knight c3 and queen takes g5? Would that be now a big possibility? Unfortunately, no. That's how it is in chess. Sometimes one move makes a big difference. Now, you really don't have a way of stopping the pawn. And the two queens, they usually beat everybody.
Yep.
So here, Black probably realized that things are looking kind of rough, and he's trying to checkmate with knight a4. Now, what's the plan? The plan is to go to c3 with a check, and knight a to c3, that is. And after b takes c, knight takes c3, that would bring the knight on c3 safely. So unfortunately, knight e4 is protecting c3 for a second time. And here he doesn't really have a way to back out, because this is not the kind of situation where you can say, okay, well, the attack didn't work out. Let me regroup and do some things positionally. You really don't have a luxury of that with opponent's pawn on f7. So he plays knight c3. He kind of goes for it. Now, could he do better? The computer says yes. He could have played king b8, bishop e2, e6. Kind of solidifying the center and hoping to sit it out. Honestly, I don't think that's a realistic possibility. Why? Because White plays f4 with the idea of bishop f3. And once that is set up, then he's going to play queen e5 check and then move knight to g5 and open up all these pins against the king. So the computer values this into White's favor, though still feels like there is at least a fight there. Knight c3 looks like, again, a very logical move. You are attacking, so you're continuing the attack. But again, in
very
a position
thematic,
like this, very thematic move. But again, you have to take concrete consideration versus principles here. And on concrete considerations, he's actually failing badly. So he played b takes c3, knight c3, knight c3, b takes c3. So he's finally all set for queen a3.
Not in time,
d8, not quite the time. Now, queen b4 unfortunately fails him. And that's probably, I don't know if he actually thought about it or not, but actually can't do it because he's in check. So you have to play rook takes d8. And now bishop takes c4 kills the important pawn. Queen a3, almost there. Bishop a6, check. Again, check. The pesky check always messes things up. And now another check.
Black is so close to checkmate. It's like right there.
And now the b2 square finally escaped. The queen can't get there. You can't take the knight on d3. If you move the king somewhere, they just simply take on d6 and promote. So queen a6 probably realistically the best there is.
Is all hope truly lost for Black?
Totally. You can't get to b2. Without b2 square, you've got nothing going on.
But what about rook over here? Rook b6.
Oh wow! Computer can't let you do this. You're in a pin.
Yeah.
Pin. Yikes! I always say pins win.
Yeah.
So a very exciting game where one player generated a fairly strong attack on the king side, and the other player also generated a strong attack on the queen side. But at the decisive moment right here, they actually both goofed. like here, white actually should have played g3 in this position instead of e6. And what's the idea of that move?
It beats me. Maybe like bishop h3 or something.
Exactly. This
Okay.
actually is very funny, but actually this move connects the rooks and now takes the exchange.
Huh.
So a very small thing here that makes a big difference. Now, I don't know about e6. This does not strike me as the best. Knight c3 here again fails. Why is that? We don't have to take.
But I think we get it. This is sort of a in the weeds type of a line. Maybe we could just go back to the top of the game, kind of quickly skim through it, and get your final recap, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, totally fine. So I would have to say that going over this game probably third or fourth time. I've looked at it a couple of times, but sometimes like Corson used to do this. I know some people that work with him in the past, and he used to do this. The first thing that he would do, he comes home after the game, whether he wins or loses, bad mood or good mood, before he goes to dinner, he takes notes of what happened in the game. He writes down whether he played well, he made a mistake. He basically writes down the critical thoughts during the game, like he thinks were the critical points, writes down what the good moves were, what the mistake he thinks was, and then he goes to dinner and so on. Then next day he looks at the game or later after the dinner, depending how late he ends. He writes down a few more thoughts, kind of looks at them quietly, kind of cooled down, got some meal, relaxed a little bit, writes down some more thoughts. And then when he comes home after the tournament, he looks at the game again, assuming it was an interesting game that had something to it, obviously, not just some game he won in 20 moves against somebody, but some competitive game that had ups and downs and wins and losses and
It
so
would be so interesting to see an example of that.
on. I think it's probably a good idea maybe to get one of his books and read it. I think he wrote a few chess books about his games. So, and then after he analyzes the game after the tournament and he writes down his final thoughts on the subject, he basically kind of puts it away. And then later, maybe a couple of months down the line or whenever he has time between the tournaments to prepare, he looks at the game again to confirm what his final thoughts are and so on. Now, this usually applies obviously not to every single game. Usually it applies to a game where there was a lot of back and forth, competitive opening, strong opponent. You had some good moments, you had some bad moments. The game lasted a while and so on. It's obviously not going to apply to a very short 15 move game. So there's no point in doing that. But for a game that actually is very competitive, as this was, it's very difficult without spending hours looking at it to pinpoint immediately where the important things were. So in this position, I can say after looking at this that black actually played well.
So for those of you listening, that there really is a very interesting, process that Korchnoi was famous for doing. And since hearing about that, I myself have been doing that after tournament games. And especially if you're, a more competitive tournament player, that really is an excellent way to kind of, accelerate your learning before you look at it with the computers to reflect over your own notes and everything. So, if you're a more advanced player, probably want to consider doing that. If you're more intermediate, I hope that you just find that, inspirational and interesting.
That's right. So it is an important thing. I do know a fair number of other kinds of players. They never quite get to the level of course now, obviously. What they do is, I got some kids that are actually really funny. When they lose a game, and I ask them, "So what happened to the score sheet? Did you record the game? How did it go?" He said, "Well, I did play it and I did record, but I recycled this." He didn't say I threw it away. He says I recycled it. It's like funny. I thought, wow, the kids are pretty smart. He says that I recycled.
Oh, that's good.
He doesn't put a negative spin in it, like I threw it away with a negative, right? I recycled it. So he did actually something positive.
No, it's okay.
It's a lot of fun.
That's funny.
Yeah, it was a kid by the name of Alan. He was quite a character. I haven't seen him since COVID, but it was quite an entertaining. And I also had another one that it was a position. I say, okay, well, take a look at this position and let me know what you think. What should I do? There's two move attack here that you should be able to invoke. And he would take it home, think about it. Then he comes back and he brings it back in his scorebook. It says, Nothing. It says by the position, it says too hard. So he looked at it and he couldn't figure it out. He tried too hard. That's it. He basically worked it, but it just didn't work out. He writes too hard. So it's
Deep,
hilarious.
deep thinking there. Yeah.
Deep thinking. So going back to the actual game here, I can say that the critical moment in this game was right about here. Now, it is really interesting that the stockfish actually thinks of this as an even position. And it does like what the player did. And it doesn't like e5 as much as I did. I actually liked e5, but the stockfish doesn't like it. It actually says that white played the best moves.
Well, we were harping earlier on the difference between general principles versus like thinking concretely, but I think that would be fitting sort of for the end of lesson and everything to kind of just restate some of those. I know you said with the Pirc, big thing to remember is the emphasis on counterattacking, and bringing out your pieces. What were some other like general guidelines or take homes that we can take from this game?
Well, I think Black actually played the opening well from that perspective because in a Pirc, most of the time people lose very quickly because they surrender space and they kind of focus on digging in on their own side of the board without setting up any kind of a counterplay. What this guy did in this game, which I find really good and positive, is he immediately established his presence there on the queen side. He didn't want to finish his castling, but he's already letting his opponent know that he's not just going to dominate the position, he's going to be counterattacked as soon as possible. And that's what he did right there. Move 10. He is making his presence known. He is establishing a good presence on the queen side, removing the knight from the center, and begins the counterattack before white actually established a serious attacking presence on the king side. That's the key.
So both sides
Now,
were very good about being ultra aggressive early on and just going immediately for that attack.
Right, you need to establish some ground on the queen side, especially with opposite side castling. If you just focus on your side of the board, you don't do any counterattack, you're just going to get smashed. The
Yeah.
H pawn is going to run at you and open up the H file, and you're going to get checkmated. When I was like a class player, I used to play Dragon and the Spirit's Defense, and I would always get checkmated if I started slowly on the counterplay. I would just get checkmated in 20 moves. And that's what happens when you surrender a lot of space to your opponent and you don't have any pawn center. If you don't establish the counterplay, you're just going to get wiped out.
Yeah. Very cool
So,
stuff. Well, I really like these examples and everything. In a recent video, someone requested some endgame knowledge and everything. Curious to know if that's something that could be on the horizon for this video series, or what you may have in mind in that regard.
sure, I've got plenty of endgames. I've got the entire database of endgames that are very spectacular. And it's actually very interesting that people are wanting to look at this. A lot of players say, well, if I'm going to play well, I'm not going to get to the end game. Who cares?
Yeah.
Why bother? I'm not going to spend any time on this. It's boring. I don't know what to do. It's confusing. I'm not going to put any effort into this.
Yeah.
Now, I would say that obviously you have to make it to the end game in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
So you probably want to establish good play in the opening and learn some good habits so you don't get checkmated.
Yeah.
But once you pass a certain level, like 1500 in my experience, 15 to 16, you begin to last longer in games. Your opponents begin to give you more resistance, and therefore you need to start working, at least get some basic end game knowledge, because majority of the players are at a complete loss of what to do. They get to the end game. Like I've seen a lot of kids do this. They start playing the end game. They don't really know what to do. They don't move the king. They just start moving with the rook. They took one rook, even if they have two, they take one and just start maneuvering with it all over the place, trying to think of something, attacking usually like one thing at a time. Attack a pawn or play check, and it's a totally aimless thing. Like I've seen games that are really like funny, spectacular. Like one opponent has an A pawn and the other has three, G, H, and F. And they each have a rook. And one of the players that has one pawn only really has one plan. He just pushes the A pawn. He doesn't have any choice. And the other guy is completely confused what to do. So he pushes F, he pushes H, he pushes G, then he moves the king, and he moves the rook. So in the end of the day, the A pawn promotes while the other get stuck in the middle.
Funny.
And it's not because they the one that had an A pawn is a much better player. It's just he actually had no choice, and he pushed the pawn that was there.
Funny.
And the other guy was totally confused and just simply shuffled different things between each other. And by the end of the day, he ended up losing. So,
well,
really
so you
important.
guys, yeah. So point I want to make there is that if you guys request stuff, in the comments, we can certainly do that. And I think based on his answer to, I mean, well, for one thing, Yorgi says yes, I got plenty to talk about with that regard. But also, I would say that I want to take this with a grain of salt now because as he points out, endgame study is really more something that's going to benefit a smaller demographic. So if we get a couple of requests for that, we may do so. Otherwise, probably going to have more reach sticking to these more tactical themes. But whatever you guys are interested, just let us know. We're all about just making some great content for you guys to check out. I think I want to end it there, end it on a high note. Is there anything else that you want to add in?
Attack, 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 guys. Learn to attack. That's what's going to win you games.
Very cool, very cool. Well, thank you so much, Yorgi. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Ryan.
Yeah.
Bye.